What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today's no different. I have Andrew Barnes, and we'll be talking about 4dayweek.com. Before I formally introduce you, Andrew, I always like to point out other episodes people should check out of the podcast. Since this is, really innovators and disruptors, and that's really what Andrew is doing, not just on a business level, but a societal level, which we'll talk about. I had the co-founder of Pixar, Alvy Ray Smith, talk about the innovations they had with first creating Toy Story. He told some great stories about Steve Jobs, George Lucas, and starting Pixar. I had the founder of Atari and Chuck E. Cheese, Nolan Bushnell, talked about some really interesting stories. And founder of Zapier, Wade Foster, talks about kind of reinventing how automation solutions worked. So check out that, many more on InspiredInsider.com. And this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream 100 partnerships and relationships. And how do we do that? We actually help you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do accountability, strategy, and the full execution. We call ourselves kind of the magic elves that work in the background to make sure everything looks easy from the company's and host standpoint. And for me, Andrew, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire on this planet and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com. And really, I heard about Andrew and his organization and the 4-day week through a guest, and they were talking about how they were one of the pilots. And so I was like, this is fascinating. And so Andrew Barnes is founder of Perpetual Guardian, and they're specialists in providing wills, trusts, enduring powers of attorney. They provide a full suite of estate planning services in New Zealand. They have offices nationwide with over 140,000 will relationships and administering or supervising assets valued over $150 billion. But in 2018, he made international headlines with an idea that he believed would raise productivity in the workplace. And this would also contribute to personal well-being of his staff, right? Win for everyone. And that was a 4-day work week, not the Tim Ferriss 4-hour work week, the 4-day work week. And he announced a 4-day week trial. You can watch the YouTube video of him announcing it. It's fascinating, with the staff receiving an extra day of work on full pay each week. And the trial sparked a widespread international interest and won a number of global awards. And Andrew's considered the pioneer and architect of the global 4-day week movement. And he co-founded it with Charlotte Lockhart. And they're conducting the largest ever trials currently taking place in UK, US, Canada, South Africa, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and more than 250 companies around the world. Over 100,000 staff are taking part in these trials, and even academics from universities like Boston College, Cambridge, Oxford, and many more. Andrew, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, hi, good to be here, Jerry.
The journey started, right? You're on a plane, you're reading The Economist, and you read a study about productivity. You email your staff member, okay, that we're going to try this out. They delete it. They delete the email. Why did they delete the email? And talk about that.
Oh, look, I'm dangerous on a plane. I'm very dangerous on a plane, because that's the time I used to have to think. And I used to get on flights from New Zealand to London, and I would binge read The Economist, and because I'm binge reading it, I get to those articles you don't normally get to. And that was one of the ones on productivity. And so when I sent it, I said, look, I've got this great idea. We'll have the staff working 4 days a week. And I probably haven't explained it as well as I might. So she's going, oh my God, pay cuts. We're going to be renegotiating contracts. This is just horrible. But I know that Andrew Binge reads The Economist. So if I delete it, I knew nothing about it. There is a fair chance he's going to forget about it. But unfortunately for her, I came back from the UK. I'd gone to see my kids, and I said, right, okay, I really want to think this is a good idea. Every single leader in my organization hated it as an idea.
What were their objections?
Well, there weren't determined objections in a way. That we are conditioned to think that working longer is working harder. We're conditioned to a life where to get to the top of the tree, we've had to put in an anti-social hours, and that's the badge of honor that we've got. And then there's a little bit of, actually working well for us now, why the blazes will we try something like this? Because if it goes wrong, I'm going to be blamed. And that's actually probably one of the only legitimate argument there, which is, I don't know how to do this because I didn't know how to do it either. So your leadership team needed to find a way to be secure about it, to be comfortable about what we were trying to do. And as I said, I'm dangerous. I'm a bit of a spray and walk away guy. I've come in saying this is an idea, right? Tell me how you're going to do it.
Something was compelling enough. Was it just you saw the research and you wanted to explore it? What was so compelling that it's a pretty disruptive idea to go to a big organization, and from the staff questions to the leadership and everyone else.
Well, actually, it was really I always feel a fraud. People bring me on these, to talk about work life and the better way of working. Me, I was just trying to work out how I made my company more productive. And what the articles prompted me to do was to start to think about a working day and how much of a working day is productive and how much is just busy or downright not busy nor productive. And what I was trying to think of is all of the things that get in the way of people being productive. Now, that is interruptions, it's other activities going on in the office which are more interesting than the piece of work that you're doing. It's a plethora, often of very small things. Unnecessary meetings, a classic case in point. So I basically did the back of the envelope calculation and said that if the 3 hours, 2.5 to 3 hours of productivity was happening in companies around the world, in all likelihood, it was happening in my company. And if I could change behavior, I only had to find 45 minutes of additional productivity in each of 4 days to sort of make up for the day off. And if I found an hour, then I'm ahead. Now, that was very, very simple math. It was, I just thought, well, why not try this? Let's see if it works. And, sort of the rest is history.
I'm curious on 4 days, right? I forgot the exact definition of Parkinson's law, but it makes me think of Parkinson's law where the time expands to how much, the task expands to how much time we have, right? So you're like, hey, we'll shorten the time. You'll get it done, right? Within the amount of time. So I'm curious why 4 day, why not 4.5 day? Why not 3 day? How did you come to a 4 day?
It just sounded good, right? I think everybody's understood, the working 7 days, dropping to 6 days, dropping to 5 days. And so was a logical reduction, really, was all I was looking to do. And you're absolutely right. There's another saying that if you leave things to the last minute, it only takes a minute for you to do it. So there is an element in here that is about just putting a line in the sand, sticking something in and saying, that's a target. Let's go and give this a try. And hence why, we did the 4 day week. It was nothing more than, well, it's a logical reduction. Let's give it a go.
It seemed like when you heard about this, you didn't really have much hesitation or fears. You wanted to implement it right away.
I wouldn't quite say that. But look, I didn't want to die wondering. And
yeah,
you've got to be bold in some of these things. I mean, I had seen, from my own work experience, the issues that I'd faced when I'd been younger. I had done quite a bit of work in the company as well on looking at unproductive time. So we had a fairly good handle on just how much was there. So it was just an experiment, right? It was not a thing that I was sitting there saying, we're locking ourselves into this. I thought, well, look, why not just experiment? There's nothing much to lose. I hedged my bets. I announced it over a period of time when it was going through the Easter period. So in effect, in New Zealand, that meant we were already having about 4 weeks when we were already having a public holiday off and you didn't get another day off. So if it worked, actually, I was on those weeks, I was not actually reducing time. But if it worked, I was actually improving productivity. So I had sort of hedged the bets through the process. But I just wanted to give it a go. That's why I knew with the resistance that we had, my board hated it. I had private capital on the board. So I announced it first on national television. And then, everybody felt obligated at least to give it a go.
You've taken, at this point, a bunch of companies through the pilot. I remember someone asking when you announced it to your company, is this going to be, I forgot if they said this is going to be documented or researched. And at the time it was like, no, we're just trying it out. Now it is. How did you track at that point if it worked? And I'm sure it's changed a little bit about how the companies now track if it worked.
Well, look, of course, I would like to say that I was a far-sighted business leader, and I worked out very quickly that we were going to have to put in place a rigorous academic framework about measuring product.
Your archaeology background, I got it.
Yeah. What actually happened is one of an academic at Auckland University of Technology saw it on the telly, I think, and then reached out and said, look, I'm doing some research in a related field. I would like to study this. And I thought, well, that's actually quite a good idea. We'll get some objective measurement. We then brought in Auckland University's business school to do some qualitative stuff as well. And that really, so we fluked the framework. I mean, let's not overplay it. We actually fluked it. We weren't intending to have research, but the research then gave us fantastic credibility with both the board, but an ability as we went through the trial and at the end of the trial to actually identify, probably for the first time almost anywhere in the world, what happened when you dropped a day and you changed working patterns.
So what happened?
Our productivity went up about 25%. Our stress levels dropped 15%. More people said they were better able to do their job working 4 days rather than 5. And all of those engagement scores, engagement, empowerment, enrichment, enthusiasm, those scores went up 40% to the levels the researchers said were the highest they'd ever seen in New Zealand. And our sick days halved. And I always say, Perpetual Guardian is, without exception, arguably one of the dullest companies in New Zealand. We're a trust company. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, I want to work for a trust company. You stumble across it, if we're being honest. But suddenly we had a crowd of people wanting to join the company. And they want to join the company because it's not what we do. It's what the 4-day week said about us as an organization, being, progressive, forward-thinking, challenging the status quo.
How are they measuring, I don't know, objectively or subjectively, the productivity?
I love this question. Can I tell you, Jeremy, it's the number one question we get asked. How do you measure productivity? How are you measuring productivity? And of course, the answer comes back, actually, we're not, right? We use time as a surrogate for productivity. We weren't measuring productivity either, really. I mean, we were doing some measurements around time, but again, that was time. So the first thing we did was that we sat everybody down and we said, how can you prove to us that your productivity, the things that you do on a weekly basis, how can we prove that that's not being adversely impacted? And secondly, how should we measure you? And so what happens in that process is that we built a series of business measurement matrices in a way. But you know what was more important was not how we measured it. It was that the challenge meant that the staff started to look at their own week and what they did and their own work and said, actually, that is not a productive activity. That is getting in the way of me being productive. So we got far more from them saying, if we change this, I will be more productive. Now, the classic example, and we talk about it now as deep work, was having a quiet hour. You have an hour, put a flag in a pot, no one will disturb you for an hour. And statistically, you get interrupted once every 11 minutes, 22 minutes to get back to full productivity. So if you have a quiet hour once a day, 4 days a week, that's broadly the equivalent of 3 hours of normal productivity in each of 4 days. There is your 4-day week improvement right there. Reduce your meeting lengths, you're doing it again, right? So what happens with this is it's these small hacks. It's not a big process re-engineering. It's lots and lots of small hacks driven by the people in your organization that enable them to get an ultimate prize of more time off. Very, very, very simple.
One of the questions when I was researching this was, how did people restructure their day? I'm sure everyone did it differently, right? You asked them. One of them, it sounds like a quiet hour, maybe reducing meetings. What else did you find that worked for people to restructure their day?
Well, one of the key things too is if you're focusing on productivity, you've got to recognize that social activity could get impacted. So what we did is we redesigned the floors that we had and we made a much bigger canteen, like a bar, coffee shop area. And we said, right, no more eating lunch at your desks. Now, that has two impacts. One is you don't have to fight the fact that the guy next to you is eating a reheated curry at lunchtime just before you're about to go on lunch break, and you just get distracted by the aroma, the fact you're hungry, the fact that they're also probably at the same time on a phone to something far more interesting than the rather mundane task that you're doing. But by making people go to the coffee area, the breakout area, what that did is it improved sociability as well. So that worked very well. We moved little meeting tables that we used to have between banks of desks. Same thing. That creates interruptions. We redesigned them with away from the desks with soft furnishings. So that deadened the noise. And then you see it in all sorts of schools these days. Certainly my kids' schools have got it. The locker to put the mobile phone in. So statistically, we look at our mobile phones once every 5 minutes.
5 seconds, maybe?
Yeah. We had a bunch of people who said, I just can't trust myself. So can I have somewhere to lock the phone away? And so we did. Now, none of this is complex. None of it's rocket science. But you do all of this when you add it together, it is really very, very powerful.
I'd love to hear, people are going back to their companies. They're announcing it to their teams. What are some of the objections people are getting from the staff themselves?
Well, I mean, the key one is, people don't think they can do it, right? They genuinely don't think they can work, in 4 days what they do in 5. So that's the first big problem. I think the second is, will I be held accountable if it fails? If this experiment goes through, that is worrying. There is a worry about, is there a question about whether, in fact, is my compensation going to go down? Is suddenly you're going to announce that we're doing 4 days a week? I have to do all my job in 4 days, and actually pay will reduce. They get worried about that too, and all of that has got to be stopped. You've got to get on top of that, because that's a major, major fear as far as people are concerned.
And that's why your email got deleted, probably. Originally.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, everybody fears that this is going to be something other than what it is.
Do people handle in different ways? Obviously, when I visualize a 4-day week, for whatever reason, I just think Friday's off. But I imagine people structure in different ways. How have you seen people structure it? Maybe they take a day in the middle of the week. Maybe they shave 3 hours off each day. How do people account for that 4-day week?
Well, there are two things that come into play here. I think number one is what works for the company. So you will often find smaller organizations think that it's better for everybody to take a single day off. Now, that's not always Friday, by the way. It might be a Wednesday. But the idea that they're doing with this is, what they're trying to do is literally say, if that works best for us, we think there's team building issues on that. If we all take it off together, it's great. If you're an organization like Perpetual Guardian, though, we have retail outlets, we can't close. So then you've got to think about how you rotate the time through the week. And we very quickly decided that we would talk about reduced hours working as opposed to just a straight out and out 4-day week. And what we did with that is we said that, look, some people would take a day off. Some people take a couple of half days. Working parents would switch often to 5 days a week, but reduced hours. Now, that means I can take the kids to school in the morning. I can pick them up in the afternoon. The key thing is, you are giving people the time off that's important to them, as opposed to the time off that isn't important to them. And it's the giving of time off that's important to them that makes it work, because people will do absolutely anything to keep that precious gift if they really value it. If they don't value it, they're not going to do it.
So when you implemented it, did you kind of just let people decide?
No, initially we said, look, we'll give you, it's a day off. You have to, in your teams, decide who's taking Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc. But by the time we finished the trial, we'd morphed it into this much more flexible working. And interestingly, there are some misguided souls who want to work conventional hours 5 days a week. That's partly about how they view the social aspects of their work.
Yeah, I remember when you were announcing it, that was one of the questions people had. Someone said, "Can I still work 5 days?"
Yeah, there's a great story that came out of an international company where they polled the staff in Bangladesh about whether, in fact, they might look at a 4-day week. And their workforce was almost entirely young women, and they voted against it. And they thought, well, this is very strange, because when asked, 80% of people around the world say, let's have a 40 week. And they said, well, why don't you not want to come into work? And they said, my mother-in-law is at home.
Well, that was actually one of the people. I think you told the story, Andrew, that someone was bringing up something about their spouse, and you said, is it because you're spending more time at home now?
Yeah, that's right. That's the key point, Jeremy, is people have got different motivations for different things. And what we've got to do is you've got to see what individual people want. And it was one of the interesting results from our UK and US pilots was we had people starting to talk about how much you would have to pay me to go back to 5 days a week. And I think 15% people in the UK trial said, you cannot pay me enough. Now, that is the difference between the 4-day week giving you the time off that's important to you and giving, I don't know, another gym membership or some other such thing, right? You know, none of that actually works.
Yeah. You thought you were going to save marriages, and not always the case. No, I'm just,
Well, yeah, that's, you know, look, having more time with your spouse sometimes doesn't work, right? But that's sort of not the point.
what were some of the challenges that you saw with the implementation that you maybe ironed out for the pilots, future pilots?
Oh, look, I mean, bringing the leadership team on the journey was the hardest thing. I mean, really, really a hard thing, I have to say, because nobody really understood what they were going to have to do differently. There was a fear. There was that big fear about, you know, if my team doesn't deliver, I'm going to get it in the neck. So you had to make it safe for the leadership team to actually come on the journey. And the other thing you had to do was not only make it safe, but you had to actually get them to walk the talk. Because the problem is that when we introduce flexible working policies wherever they are in whatever company, you will find that they always fail if there is a line manager who doesn't agree with it. So we agree with flexible working, but you've got a line manager who doesn't. Instantaneously, that policy fails. So we had to say to the leadership team, look, we're not going to make you responsible if this doesn't work, but you are accountable to make sure that your team gives it the best shot it can possibly do. And if you do that, if you structure it so that you've done everything possible to give a really good try of this, and it doesn't work, that's on me. That's not on you. Now, I'm lucky I owned the principal amount of the company. At the end of the day, if this had gone wrong, it was my back pocket, not anybody else's. But, you know, that's quite a journey for a leadership team to go on.
Yeah. No, I could see that. It's tough because if there's a company and there's 5 departments and 4 of the departments love it and one of the departments, I don't know, maybe someone wasn't on board and it didn't work because of that, then what do you do as a company, right? I mean, if you release it across all of them.
Well, I mean, the trick is it's a trial, right? So the key part of this, it's because it's a trial, you accept that there may be failure in certain areas and you adjust the trial accordingly to take account of failure. Now, we in our little experiment did it in such a way that the employees opted into the policy. We had fairly strict employment laws here in New Zealand, which makes it very difficult, for example, to have people taking different days off on different weeks. So to get around it, we had to have an opt-in policy. Your terms and conditions didn't change. Now, that actually was quietly useful because it meant that we were able to say to people, look, if this doesn't work, if you don't deliver the same level of productivity and customer service, we can ask you to come back to 5 days. Well, in fact, we can do more than ask. We can require you to come back to 5 days. And I've only ever had to do that sanction once in 5 years in my company. So in a funny sort of way, part of the organization failing and going back to 5 days is actually not unhelpful. I mean, there's an old story from British naval history. I'm an ex-naval officer in the distant days, where there was an Admiral Byng who was shot on his own quarterdeck, who encouraged the others, right? Now, it's not quite the same, but having a department going back from 4 to 5 concentrates the mind of everybody else. This is not a free lunch. This is not, we're not saying work-life balance dominates absolutely everything. We're saying for this to work, it's got to work for everybody. It's got to work for the employees. It's got to work for the business. It's got to work for the customers. It's got to work for the shareholders. And you've got to take this seriously. If you don't take this seriously, it will fail. So take it seriously.
Have you found, Andrew, that certain attributes of a company it works better for? I'm just curious of size of a company. Like if you're less than 5 people or 10, as an example, of certain attributes, you're like, hey, this we found has worked well for it. Maybe if you fit in this criteria, it may not work well for. I don't know.
Not really. I mean, look, it's easier to implement in smaller companies. It just is, right? But even a large organization is made up of lots of small units. So if you pick things off unit by unit, so for example, you look at Unilever that's experimenting with it now, hundreds of thousands of employees, started in New Zealand, moved their experiment across after a while to Australia, and then we'll progressively, roll that out bit by bit. We do say to big organizations, rolling it out by department, pick the department that you think it's going to work. That gives you good lessons. Apply those lessons to the next most complex, and so on and so on. Now, if you go back to the genesis of the 5-day week, I think it took Henry Ford about 3 years to roll it out across Ford from working 6 days to working 5. It wasn't an instantaneous, from tomorrow we're all working 5 days a week. So we're not dissimilar. We say that you've got to, it's not a race in the context of being a sprint. It's really about building something that is sustainable for the long term, because everybody can get excited about a pilot. You've got to be able to go through the pilot and then make it sustainable in the long term.
What happened, Adam Bank? What happened there?
Yeah. Well, Atom was really interesting because they are a UK-based, completely digital bank. And they decided to give it a go. So this is a challenger bank. So it's got all the attributes of, we say, well, it wouldn't possibly work in tech. It couldn't work when I'm doing a startup. We're growing too fast. And they implemented it. And what they found was the same as everything else. They found their productivity improved. They found their staff turnover rates dropped enormously. They found that applicants went up, I think, 500%, which is, sort of extraordinary in the context of labor markets that are getting tight, really, really tight and difficult to attract and retain great staff. So they got themselves to the point that they didn't just decide that they were going to, they were going to keep it. They then turned themselves in being to be incredible evangelical about the whole of the 4-day week. And that's really, Jeremy, what happens to companies that come on the journey. 90-something% of all companies on our trials come up and say, actually, this is fantastic. And about 96% of employees say it's fantastic. Yeah, and so that's what makes this work. Everybody comes out of this and says, this is a really great experience.
Talk about the team a little bit.
The 4-day week?
Yeah.
Well, again, we're very accidental in that initially, when we announced this, it was my phone that kept ringing. And then my partner, Charlotte, she sort of picked up the mantle of trying to do a bit more organization, and her phone kept on ringing. And then we got companies from all over the world who reached out and said, how did you do this? Now, we don't sell 4-day weeks, right? We were as you know, we're a trust company. So what we did is we started to build 4-day week global. And that means we've got, so Alex Pang at the top end. Alex, I actually came across Alex because he wrote about the Perpetual Guardian trial. And he is a published author. He's just, as I have, he's published a book on the 4-day week. And Alex really runs our programs now. He's probably, as an individual, he's probably talked to more companies anywhere in the world about what they're doing with regard to the 4-day week. We've just appointed Dale Whelan as our chief executive, and Dale's based out of Ireland. He's also, he's a PhD. He's been studying this a bit. He's worked in big accounting groups worldwide. So he's now running our sort of global team. We have about 8 to 9, depending on what pilots we're running, people worldwide, because we're running pilots in, Portugal, Brazil, the US, North America, Europe, South Africa. We've got Israel coming up. So the team really, all they do is that some of them handle our social media. So people like Jack and Hazel handle our media. But other people in the teams are the guys who have got the boots on the ground in different countries. And they are working to implement the pilots, help the companies along, find the mentors for them, link the companies with other experts around the world. And then on top of that, we have our research team, which is coordinated by, Professor Juliet Shaw out of Boston College as far as quant is concerned, and Professor Brendan Birchall out of Cambridge is doing quite a bit of our qualitative work. But we always try and have a researcher in the country where we are running a trial. So, for example, John down there on the screen is doing some of the work that we've got in our Australasian pilot. So it's very much linked to where we're running a pilot. We will always have a local research partner who handles the qualitative research on the ground.
It just sounds like this is kind of taken on a life of its own. And I want to talk about the effects, because I know you touch on the effects on the wider economy and the societal effects as well.
Yeah, I think we've pretty well proven in the pilot programs that we've done over the last few years that as far as a company is concerned, productivity is not impacted. Customer service is not impacted. So what starts to become a little bit more interesting, I think, is that what are the societal impacts? So let's look a little bit at the UK data. So, sick days dropped 65% or thereabouts. Now, the UK loses 17.9 million days, worker days a year, occasioned by work-related stress. So if you can get a 65% reduction on that, that is the equivalent of a £35 billion injection into the UK economy, just off that one thing alone. If you are taking, people are working a 4-day week, there is some research, again, UK research, maybe a bit suspect, but they've said it's the equivalent of taking the entire UK private car fleet off the road. Now, that does a massive amount as far as carbon emissions are concerned. And we are seeing that when people take a day off, they actually do low carbon activity, because what they then do is they have time for doing things like cooking. So not only do they cook more healthy food, it means they're not ordering Uber Eats or the like of those sort of home food delivery services, which means they're taking further vehicles off the road, which means they are not having those sort of issues around, high salt high fat dishes, which are often prevalent in that type of takeaway. Now, that's relevant if you look at the obesity epidemic. What happens if you can spend time educating your kids? What happens if you can to family cohesion, if you could do that? What happens to volunteering? You know, or service organizations like Rotary are ceasing to exist because there isn't time for people to take out to go and do that type of volunteering. Got a day a week, you can go back to do that sort of volunteering. Now, you know, Rotary is an organization that cured polio worldwide, for crying out loud. We lose these things absolutely at our peril.
Even this is people are on the political level are implementing this. Can you talk about some governments?
Sure. So we are working now with the Portuguese government and the Spanish governments have both announced government-sponsored trials. I'm told that overnight German government has come out and said that. The Australian Select Committee on Work and Care has come out and said the Australians should run a trial. We've had conversations with governments in South America, the Middle East, and Europe. Lots of politicians now. And this is partly, I'm going to be a little facetious, partly because there's a good piece of research that's come out of Oxford University that says that incumbent governments get re-elected, the happier the people are. So if people get happier with a 4-day week, maybe, you know, governments announcing that they'll look at it improves their chances of being re-elected.
You got my vote. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But what I think is happening is countries, just as companies have recognized that this makes them more competitive, more attractive as a place to work, governments are starting to do exactly the same when they look at their country. You know, we've got shortage of, you know, critical skills, nurses, I think, fair to say, throughout the Western world. So if you are the first government in the West that says, I tell you what, nurses work 4 days a week, guarantee you won't have a problem attracting and retaining nurses. So I think we are now at the point that the data is becoming so persuasive and the level of debate is becoming, you know, of sufficient substance and noise that governments are now saying we are going to have to look at this. And so legislation is coming in. Well, it's in Belgium, Romania, Lithuania. There was some legislation done in Russia. There's a variant in India and something in Japan. The UAE, of course, has gone to a 4-day week. I mean, it is starting to get traction and not necessarily in the places you would have thought, right? You know, especially Japan with a word for dying at the office.
First of all, Andrew, I want to thank you. I have one last question, but thanks for sharing your journey. Thanks for sharing this experiment that took on a life of its own. I'm glad that even though the email got deleted, you just followed up with it. My last question is, I'd love to hear your favorite resources. It could be books, it could be business, it could be productivity, whatever it is. I'll start with one, obviously. You can go to, everyone can check out 4dayweek.com to learn more about what we're talking about. But there's a book, actually, that is the 4-day week. The 5 is crossed out. The 4-day week, how the flexible work revolution can increase productivity, profitability, and well-being and create a sustainable future. What are some of your favorite books, resources?
You know, I've always been very bad at reading business-related books. So I don't do that very often. But one that I've read recently, which it's sort of linked to what we're doing at 4-day week, is this concept of the book on donut economics, which is quite interesting because I think it starts to say that we've got to build an economic model that's working a little bit within the constraints of what the planet can actually sustain. So that had made quite an impression on me. And I have to say, I'm an avid reader of things like, Bad Blood on the Theranos thing, because I'm of the generation that believes that businesses make money and profits, and I'm not a huge fan of fake it till you make it. So they've been quite. They're sort of a bit of a diversion. But the best books often that I've read are really on the things that inspire me, or are things on leadership, and the ability to keep going in times of crisis. So Shackleton's books, Shackleton South, the Weddell Sea expedition, Cherry Gerard, The Worst Journey in the World. These are fantastic books where you look at these people and you go, my goodness, what is it that drove you? What is it that sustains you through really difficult times? And I'm always inspired by that quote from Churchill, where he talks about success is not final, failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. And you look back on your own career and you go, you know what? At any point in time, it would have been far easier to just give up. And even with the 4-day week, it's completely taken over our lives in the last 5 years. We are resigned to doing calls at all hours of the night because people all over the world, want to talk about it. And we don't make money out of the 4-day week. It's our not-for-profit. It's a view, I think, that Charlotte and I took, that you don't get many chances to change the world. And really, this happens to be our chance. And it's sometimes easier to walk away from that rather than to say, no, damn it, we're going to make it happen.
Andrew, I'm the first one to thank you. Thanks for sharing your journey, the story. Everyone check out 4dayweek.com to learn more and more episodes of the podcast. And Andrew, thanks so much.
Thanks, Jeremy. Good to be here.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like $100 grand.